The August heat lay heavy over Willow Springs like a funeral shroud, pressing down on ramshackle buildings where hope had long since withered under Dakota Territory's unforgiving sun. Behind the Silver Spur Saloon, where the stench of rot-gut whiskey mingled with human desperation, gunfire cracked through the humid evening air. In the Henderson farmstead 3 miles east, Sarah Henderson pressed her cracked lips together as she drew the last cup of muddy water from their well. Her husband Jacob sat motionless at their kitchen table, staring at the foreclosure notice that bore Conrad Dietrich's official seal. "Creek's been dry for 2 weeks now," Jacob said without looking up. "Dietrich's got his dam upstream, taking every drop for that cursed mill of his." Their youngest boy, barely 6, tugged at Sarah's worn calico skirt. "Mama, I'm thirsty." Sarah's eyes filled, but no tears came. Her body had no moisture to spare. Meanwhile, behind the Silver Spur's peeling walls, Tokala pressed his lean frame against weathered pine siding, Spencer carbine gripped in hands that bore the scars of countless battles. At 28, the Kit Fox warrior had learned that white man's mercy was rarer than water in drought season. Third door past the kitchen. Wikasa whispered his Colt Navy, catching sickly lamplight. "She's in there." They had ridden 3 days following tracks that told a brutal story. Ayanna, 16, and promised to Tokala's younger brother, vanished from the berry grounds, while her companion's screams went unheeded. The Silver Spur squatted at Main Street's end, like a diseased toad, its broken shutters advertising moral decay within. The back door groaned open, revealing Greasy Pete's mountain of unwashed flesh. His pig eyes glittered with casual cruelty as he hefted an iron-studded club. 3 more redskins. Pete growled tobacco juice staining his beard. "Word ain't spread what happens to your kind here." The Spencer's butt plate found his temple with surgical precision. Pete collapsed, blood pooling beneath his skull. "Watch for cavalry." Tokala commanded in Lakota, then moved into the hallway's stench-laudanum unwashed bodies and something fouler that made his warrior instincts scream. Boots thundered overhead. Indians after the merchandise. A pistol cracked plaster exploding near his ear as Tokala navigated the maze where human flesh was traded like cattle. The third door revealed a coffin-sized room lit by guttering candlelight. On a rope-strung cot lay a small figure, black hair braided in unmarried style. The telltale limpness of drugged sleep, shallow breathing, slack limbs. This had to be Ayanna. "Don't let him reach his horse." Tokala looped rawhide under unconscious arms, hoisting the woman over his shoulder. She was lighter than expected, poorly fed for days. The laudanum kept her unaware as he carried her toward salvation or death. What Tokala couldn't know was that this woman wasn't Ayanna, but 19-year-old Elise Colette, whose nightmare had begun when Conrad Dietrich's men shattered her boarding house door 3 nights past. Elise had awakened from chemical stupor hours ago, but remained motionless, a survival instinct learned in captivity's harsh school. Through slitted eyes, she'd watched captors discuss her value in terms that curdled blood, felt rough hands position her like livestock awaiting auction. When gunfire erupted and the dark warrior burst through her door, she'd expected violation or death. Instead, strong arms lifted her with unexpected gentleness, carrying her from hell into Dakota's star-scattered night. For the first time in 3 days of unimaginable terror, Elise Colette dared hope for dawn. They rode hard through darkness, splashing across Willow Creek, where water still ran free, climbing toward the Badlands' protective maze. The woman never stirred, even when navigating treacherous stone passages carved by ancient waters. Dawn broke gray and cold as Tokala guided his mount to a hidden grove beside spring-fed water. Only when concealed among cottonwoods did he dismount, setting the woman gently on a fallen log. blue eyes alert as cornflowers studied his face in growing light, golden hair beneath grime-pale skin, torn calico, definitely not Lakota. You. Her voice carried Louisiana's musical accent. You saved me from those animals. Tokala's English came carefully measured. Wrong woman, you're not who we sought. Understanding dawned like sunrise. Then who? Ayanna, Standing Bear's daughter, 16 summers. He watched her process this information, noting intelligence behind those blue eyes. Taken from berry grounds 3 days past. There were others. Elise's words came slowly, choosing each carefully. Other rooms, other prisoners. They move us around to different sections. Before Tokala could respond, Yiska's sharp whistle cut morning air. Dust clouds marked approaching riders' badges, glinting the organized pursuit of territorial law. Sheriff Klaus Wicasa identified. 6 deputies, maybe more, in the dust. Magnus Klaus, known from Yellowstone to the Platte as a man who kept order through equal measures of justice and iron will. What Tokala didn't know was that the sheriff carried chains heavier than any prisoners. 3 years past, Conrad Dietrich had presented Magnus with photographs his brother Thomas shot in the back before explosives brought down the mine tunnel, made to look accidental. Dietrich's insurance against any inconvenient conscience the sheriff might develop. Now, riding with a posse that included Dietrich's hired guns, Magnus faced choices that would define what remained of his soul. In the cottonwood grove, Elise made her own defining decision. Fingers worked along her corset's inner seam until they found 2 precious documents sewn into fabric, where searches wouldn't discover them. She hesitated, studying Tokala's reaction before continuing. This is why they took me. Papers unfolded in trembling hands, survey sketch notarized letter bearing territorial seals. My father, Pierre René, filed water claim on Willow Creek before pneumonia took him last winter. Her voice grew stronger with each word. These prove I inherited rights to the headgate. Tokala examined documents he couldn't read, but understood. Water meant life. Whoever controlled the creek controlled everything downstream. Conrad Dietrich owns the mine upstream, Elise continued. Wants to divert the entire creek to his stamp mill. Can't do it legally while She paused, measuring her words. While these papers exist. Hoofbeats drummed closer. But instead of flight, Tokala studied this unexpected ally, a woman whose courage had impressed even the most skeptical warriors during their desperate ride. Will you trust a Lakota warrior with your life? Elise met his gaze directly. Will you trust a white woman with yours? The question hung between them like morning mist, acknowledging barriers that separated their worlds, yet somehow, in this moment, seemed less insurmountable. Yes, they said together. The posse found them at Ash River, where cottonwoods yielded to grassland. Sheriff Magnus Klaus rode point on his weathered gray, 6 men behind, including Greasy Pete, somehow mounted despite his skull-cracking pig eyes, burning for revenge. Tokala emerged with hands visible but ready Spencer across his back. Elise walked beside him, wearing Wicasa's doe-skin shirt, chin set with quiet determination. Sheriff Klaus. Tokala's voice carried clearly. We would speak. Speaking gets done in town. Magnus's tone carried reluctance, like a hidden wound. That woman was taken from lawful custody. You're under arrest. Lawful. Elise stepped forward, accent lending music to her indignation. I was drugged, held prisoner by men who trade human flesh. This man rescued me. Pete spat brown juice. She's Dietrich's property, bought legal. You savages got no business. One of Dietrich's guns scarred Blackwood drew his Colt with practiced ease. Enough jawing. Time for dying. Tokala moved like flowing water as the first shot cracked across morning air. Bark exploded where his head had been, while Wikasa's Winchester answered from concealment, heavy slugs spinning Blackwood from his saddle. "Cover!" Magnus shouted, but his men were already scattering as more shots rang from hidden positions. Pete charged Elise with gleaming bowie knife. She dove riverward as Tokala's Spencer boomed, shattering the horse's leg and sending both mount and rider crashing in a tangle of thrashing limbs. Yiska materialized from Willow's revolver, barking twice. One deputy hit water, clutching his bleeding thigh, while another surrendered, suddenly remembering family waiting at home. "Hold fire." Magnus commanded, weapons still holstered despite chaos. "All of you hold your damned fire." Silence fell, save for wounded groans and water's eternal song against stone. Tokala kept the Spencer ready while his cousins maintained crossfire from the trees. "Not what we wanted," Tokala said without lowering his weapon. "We came seeking truth." "Truth." Pete wheezed from beneath his dying horse. "You shot up law officers." "Your man drew first." Elise knelt beside the wounded deputy, tearing petticoat strips to bind his wound. "Learned nursing from the sisters in New Orleans. Bullet wounds need tending, whatever their cause." Magnus dismounted slowly, hand near his gun, but not drawing. Up close, conflict showed in every line of his weathered face. Too many hard choices, too many compromises with conscience. "Miss Colette." His voice carried formal weight. "Mr. Dietrich claims you're his intended bride. Says these Indians assaulted his property." "I am no man's property." Elise didn't look up from her patient. "Never agreed to marry anyone. Was working as seamstress when his men broke down my door, dragged me away like some criminal." Magnus studied the papers she produced, expression darkening with comprehension. Pierre René's claim covered Willow Creek's primary headgate, exactly what Dietrich needed for expansion that would make him territory's richest man. "These appear legitimate." "They are legitimate," Tokala confirmed. "Which explains why Dietrich chose theft over honest purchase." New dust clouds appeared larger this time, suggesting a dozen riders approaching fast from Willow Springs. Dietrich's private army. Pete managed through pain. "You're buzzard meat now." Magnus felt Trapp's jaws closing. Arrest Tokala and return Elise to Dietrich, become complicit in kidnapping and forced marriage. Or protect them and face his employer's wrath, likely losing badge income, possibly life itself. The approaching riders resolved into Conrad Dietrich in expensive black suit, followed by professional killers whose loyalty extended exactly as far as their pay. "Choose, Sheriff," Tokala said quietly. "Which law do you serve?" Magnus looked at Elise, who'd finished bandaging the deputy and was helping him to safety. Her actions spoke louder than any testimony about her character. The sheriff made his choice. "Miss Colette, I place you under my personal protection as witness in a criminal investigation. Anyone attempting harm answers to territorial and federal law." It bought time. As Dietrich's riders thundered closer, Magnus began forming plans that might see justice done before more blood-stained Dakota soil. The following weeks blurred into desperate flight across territory that showed no mercy to the hunted. Magnus led them to hidden Lakota camps in pine-covered hills above Timberline Creek, where Tokala's sister Winona tended wounds, while cultures collided in ways neither had expected. Around the evening fire, young Chatan, barely 20 and hot with warrior's pride, voiced what others thought, but didn't say. "You bring Wasaku woman to our fires." His words cut like winter wind. What next? Invite bluecoats to share our meat. Winona's weathered hands never paused in their work grinding medicinal roots. The hawk does not ask the sparrow's permission to hunt mice, nephew. Tokala follows his path as Wakantanka guides. His path leads away from the people. Chatan persisted. Already he speaks her tongue more than ours. Tokala's jaw tightened, but Elise spoke first, her broken Lakota earning surprised glances. I learn your ways, not to replace my own, but to... She struggled for words. To build bridge between our peoples. Chatan snorted. Bridges burn, Wasiku. Your people have shown us that. Not all bridges. Winona said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of age and wisdom. Some are built of stones too deep to burn. In the uncomfortable silence that followed, Elise felt the weight of cultural chasms that good intentions alone couldn't bridge. Later, helping Winona prepare traditional remedies, she found unexpected common ground. Your father taught you healing arts? Winona asked, noting Elise's skilled hands with herbs. Some, but more about seeing what others miss. Reading signs. Elise hesitated. He said surveyors and doctors both must see what lies beneath the surface. Winona nodded approvingly. Good medicine. Your father was wise to teach daughters such things. Most Wasiku keep women ignorant as cattle. Their conversation was interrupted by scouts bringing grim news. Dietrich had consolidated control over Willow Springs, replacing Magnus with Deputy Blackwood and posting $1,000 bounties. More troubling, no word of Ayanna, despite extensive searching. That night, as autumn's first bite sharpened the air, Tokala and Elise found themselves on guard duty together. The silence stretched comfortable now, no longer awkward as in those first desperate days. Tell me about your father. Tokala said eventually, his English grown more natural through constant use. Elise was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When words came, they carried weight of old grief. Papa was. He called himself a man between worlds. Born in France, but dreamed of America. Studied law in Paris, surveying in New Orleans. Said the frontier needed men who understood both old ways and new. He prepared you for this life. No. Her laugh held little humor. He prepared me for civilization. Maps, documents, proper forms. Never imagined I'd need his lessons to survive in a world where might makes right. Your world is changing too. Soon there will be no place for warriors or wanderers. Perhaps, but there will always be need for those who stand between the strong and the weak. Their eyes met across the dying fire, and something passed between them, understanding deeper than words. Recognition of kindred spirits cast adrift in a changing world. Miles away in Willow Springs, Magnus Klaus sat in his office staring at the photographs that had enslaved him for 3 years. His brother Thomas shot in the back, then positioned in the mine tunnel before explosives made it look accidental. Dietrich's insurance policy against inconvenient conscience. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Dr. Walter Marcel entered, medical bag in hand, and concern etched in every line of his scholarly face. You look like hell, Magnus. Feel worse. The sheriff's voice carried weight of accumulated sins. Heard you've been asking questions about the Colette girl. Marcel closed the door carefully before responding. I attended her father during his final illness. Pierre never mentioned any engagement to Dietrich. In fact, he specifically requested I witness his will, left everything to Elise, with express instruction she never be forced into marriage for financial convenience. Dietrich's got lawyers say otherwise. Dietrich's got gold says otherwise. Marcel's normally gentle voice carried steel. There's a difference. Magnus laughed bitterly. Gold makes its own law out here, Doc. You know that. Not always. Marcel produced a leather portfolio. Territory law requires water disputes of this magnitude be heard by circuit judges, not local magistrates. Judge Harrison Crawford's due in Raven's Nest next month. He's got reputation for honesty, even Dietrich's gold can't tarnish. For the first time in months, Magnus felt something like hope stirring in his chest. But hope was dangerous for a man in his position. Crawford ever makes it that far, he said quietly. Road's got plenty of places for accidents. Then we'd best make sure he arrives safely, with evidence he can't ignore. The plan they hatched was desperate, but offered their only chance. The land office in Raven's Nest contained original documents that would prove Dietrich's fraud if they could access them without getting killed in the attempt. 2 weeks later, under October's gray skies, their small party approached Raven's Nest through back trails that avoided Dietrich's patrols. The territorial town appeared almost deserted, its government buildings standing like tombstones in the autumn chill. Dr. Marcel's medical emergency. A convincing case of appendicitis requiring immediate consultation. Distracted the elderly land office clerk while Magnus and Elise slipped through the rear entrance. The filing system was methodical but extensive, thousands of claims organized with bureaucratic precision. Pierre René's original water claim sat exactly where territorial law required properly notarized, correctly surveyed filed March 15, 1878. But Dietrich's duplicate told a sinister story. Same date, different handwriting, fresher ink, and witness signature belonging to Thomas Ackerman, the clerk, who'd subsequently drowned under suspicious circumstances. Mother of God, Magnus whispered, understanding flooding through him. It's not just fraud. It's murder to cover fraud. Elise finished photographing evidence with steady hands, despite the implications. How many others has he killed for convenience? They were copying the last crucial documents when gunfire erupted outside. Through windows, they saw mounted men surrounding the building while townspeople fled. Conrad Dietrich sat his black gelding in the street center, no longer bothering with pretense. His voice carried clearly in the thin air. You have 10 minutes to surrender the documents and the woman. After that, we come in shooting. The siege began with professional efficiency. Dietrich's men took positions demonstrating military training, while the land office's large windows offered excellent fields of fire for attackers, but minimal protection for defenders. Magnus crouched behind an overturned desk, checking ammunition. 37 rifle rounds, maybe 20 handgun cartridges. Against 15 professional killers. Tokala observed grimly. Not favorable odds. Dr. Marcel covered the rear exit, sweat beading despite the cold. They can simply wait us out. We'll run out of ammunition long before they lose patience. Elise knelt beside the safe, still working with photographic plates, despite chaos erupting around them. There's more here, correspondence between Dietrich and territorial officials' payment records, evidence of systematic corruption reaching the highest levels. The documentation was overwhelming, but worthless if they died before presenting it. Judge Crawford wasn't due until noon, hours away, in a siege measured by minutes. Someone needs to warn the judge, Magnus said. Let him know what he's riding into. I'll go. Tokala studied terrain through the back window. Good cover in those rocks, and I know the country better than any white man alive. The first shots shattered morning quiet as rifle bullets punched through windows with professional precision. A gunfighter in tan duster had taken position behind a water trough across the street. Tokala's Spencer boomed, spinning the man into dust between hitching posts. But more muzzle flashes appeared from second-story windows and alley mouths. The battle settled into deadly rhythm, Dietrich's men maintaining pressure while conserving ammunition, having no need to hurry. When Dr. Marcel spotted flankers behind the general store, Tokala shifted position to cover the new threat. The movement reopened an old shoulder wound, sending fresh blood through makeshift bandages. His shooting accuracy suffered accordingly. "Can't hold this angle much longer," he admitted through gritted teeth. Outside, Dietrich had grown impatient. "Burn them out. Use coal oil from Murphy's wagon." Elise finished her photographic work packing plates with reverent care. Whatever happened, the evidence would survive. "Judge will be on the main road," she told Tokala. "If you can reach him." "I'll reach him or die trying." Magnus emptied his revolver through the front window, creating the diversion Tokala needed to slip out back. The warrior moved through outbuildings like smoke given form, using every shadow to avoid detection. He'd almost reached his hidden pony when disaster struck. A rifle bullet from the hotel roof caught him in the left side, spinning him behind lumber piles as blood soaked his shirt. The wound was serious, debilitating enough to make rapid movement impossible. A sniper had clear sight of his position, working his rifle's lever for a killing shot. Tokala gripped his Spencer, trying to locate the shooter, but effort sent agony through his wounded side, while black spots danced across his vision. He was dying. But Crawford was hours away, and someone had to warn the judge about Dietrich's trap. With tremendous effort, Tokala dragged himself toward his pony, leaving blood trails in autumn dust. Behind him, smoke rose from the land office as Dietrich's men implemented their burning strategy. Time was running out for everyone inside. Somehow, he had to reach Crawford before another good man died in Dietrich's web of corruption. The question was whether consciousness would last long enough to deliver his warning. Smoke filled the land office like hell's own fog, thick fumes billowing through floorboards as flames licked window frames with hungry tongues. The acrid vapors burned throats raw while tears streamed from stinging eyes. Magnus had tied his bandana over nose and mouth, but protection was minimal against poisonous smoke seeping through every crack. Through streaming eyes, he maintained his position, firing carefully aimed shots while rationing precious ammunition. "That back door's blocked," Dr. Marcel reported, coughing violently. "They've piled brush and set it alight. We're trapped like rats in a barrel." Elise crouched beside the safe, clutching photographic evidence, while smoke burned her lungs. Her dress had turned gray with soot tears cutting clean tracks down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady as granite. "How long before the roof catches?" "20 minutes at most," Magnus replied, firing his last rounds at shapes moving through the smoke. "This whole place becomes an oven then." Through crackling flames, Dietrich's voice carried triumphant authority. "Watch every window, don't let any escape alive." The mine owner's satisfaction was premature. Judge Harrison Crawford had been traveling from Deadwood when a blood-soaked Lakota warrior intercepted his judicial convoy 2 miles outside Raven's Nest. Tokala's warning, delivered in desperate mixture of English and gestures before he collapsed across his pony's neck, had transformed what should have been routine travel into military operation. Crawford, former cavalry officer who'd learned to read battlefields during 4 years of civil war, immediately recognized smoke rising from town and sustained gunfire. Instead of riding into Dietrich's trap, he dispatched his escort to circle behind attackers while approaching from unexpected direction. The first indication that circumstances had changed came when rifle fire erupted from hills overlooking Raven's Nest. Caught between the burning building and Crawford's cavalry, Dietrich's men suddenly found themselves fighting on 2 fronts. "What's that shooting?" Dr. Marcel called through smoke-stained windows. Magnus caught glimpses of blue uniforms moving with military precision between buildings. Cavalry. Someone got word to the right people. Federal intervention transformed the tactical situation, but also made Dietrich desperate. Through increasing smoke, they could hear him rallying remaining men for final assault rather than face justice in territorial courts. "They're coming," Magnus warned, checking his empty revolver and drawing backup pistol, a .32 caliber, with only 5 shots between life and death. The front door exploded inward as 3 gunmen burst through faces masked against smoke weapons, ready for close-quarters killing. Magnus shot the first man center mass, sending him tumbling backward into the street. But the other 2 spread out with professional competence. Dr. Marcel swung his medical bag like a club with desperate courage, but a rifle butt to his temple dropped him unconscious beside overturned furniture. Elise screamed and grabbed for Magnus's fallen revolver, but inexperience made her movements clumsy in the crucial seconds that followed. The second gunman was drawing careful aim at her heart when salvation arrived from an impossible direction. Tokala appeared in the doorway, like an avenging spirit risen from his deathbed, somehow having survived his wounds through sheer force of will that defied medical possibility. Blood loss had left him pale as winter snow, unsteady on his feet, but his eyes burned with determination that would not be denied. "You're down," he commanded as his Spencer boomed in the confined space. The heavy bullet caught the gunman in the shoulder, spinning him like a child's top, while his own shot went wild into the ceiling. Before he could recover, Magnus put a precise .32 slug through his heart. The third attacker had taken cover behind document shelves, using the office's own records as protection, while reloading with professional calm. Smoke swirled around his position, like living things seeking to conceal and protect. Conrad Dietrich. Tokala called, recognizing expensive boots beneath the shelves, despite blood loss threatening his consciousness. "Face me like a man, instead of hiding behind paper like some coward." The mine owner emerged with snarl, transforming his usually composed features into something resembling a rabid animal. His ordinarily immaculate appearance was disheveled by smoke and fear that had finally penetrated his armor of wealth and privilege. In his hands was a double-barreled shotgun designed for close-range destruction. "Should have taken my gold when offered." He spat, swinging the weapon toward Elise, with movements made clumsy by rage and desperation. "Now you all die for nothing, and I'll own this entire territory before winter ends." But Dietrich had made a fatal positioning error. The same smoke concealing his movements also hid Tokala's approach until the warrior was close enough to strike with the knife that had served him through countless battles. Steel flashed in firelight like captured lightning as the blade opened Dietrich's throat in a single clean cut that severed arteries and windpipe with surgical precision. The mine owner crashed to the floor amid scattered documents and pooling blood, his empire dreams dying with him in flames he'd set to destroy others. The shotgun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as dying fingers spasmed around triggers in final reflex. Outside, cavalry trumpets sounded as Crawford's escort completed their encirclement. Dietrich's surviving gunmen were throwing down weapons rather than face federal soldiers whose authority extended beyond local corruption. Magnus helped Dr. Marcel to his feet while checking the physician's head wound. "You alive, Doc?" "Think so," Marcel replied groggily, accepting support while consciousness returned through waves of pain. "Did we get them all?" Elise emerged from behind the safe, still clutching evidence that could reshape territorial politics. Her white dress was completely ruined by smoke and soot, but her grip on precious documents never wavered despite everything she'd endured. "Is it over?" she asked quietly, staring at Dietrich's corpse with mixture of relief and horror. For him, yes. Tokala replied, leaning heavily against the doorframe as blood seeped steadily through his bandages. For justice, that depends on what the judge decides to do with what we've learned. They stumbled from the burning land office into comparative clarity of street outside, where Judge Harrison Crawford waited with cavalry troopers and scattered remnants of Dietrich's private army. The surviving gunfighters had surrendered rather than face federal authority that couldn't be bought or intimidated. Crawford was a distinguished man in his 60s, silver hair catching morning sunlight, and bearing that spoke of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions under pressure that would crush lesser men. His judicial robes were dusty from hard riding and stained with smoke. But his authority was unmistakable as he surveyed the scene with eyes that had witnessed too much of human nature's capacity for both evil and redemption. "I am Judge Harrison Crawford of the Territorial Circuit Court," he announced formally. "By authority vested in me by the United States government, I declare this matter under federal jurisdiction pending complete investigation." Elise stepped forward with determination that had carried her through captivity, pursuit, and siege. "Your Honor, we have documented evidence of massive fraud and corruption involving water rights government officials and systematic criminal activity extending throughout the territory. Then we shall examine it with the thoroughness it deserves," Crawford replied gravely. "But first, medical attention for the wounded and proper securing of the scene. Justice delayed may be justice denied, but justice delivered in haste often proves to be no justice at all." As Dr. Marcel tended Tokala's wounds with supplies from his medical bag, and cavalry troopers secured the prisoners, Elise allowed herself to believe, for the first time since her father's death, that her ordeal might finally be approaching an end that honored both law and human decency. 3 days later, the territorial courthouse in Raven's Nest had been hastily converted from a granary, its wooden walls still carrying faint aromas of stored wheat, despite months of legal proceedings. Judge Crawford had established temporary court away from the smoke-damaged land office, while federal investigators examined evidence of Dietrich's criminal network with the thoroughness of archaeologists uncovering ancient corruption. The scope of what they discovered shocked even experienced officials. Dietrich's ledgers contained detailed payments to 17 territorial officials, clerks, surveyors, marshals, even a federal Indian agent whose oath was supposed to protect tribal interests. The trafficking network extended across 3 territories, supplying brothels and private buyers throughout the frontier with systematic efficiency that spoke of careful organization and unlimited greed. Sheriff Magnus Klaus had been reinstated with full federal backing, his badge returned along with formal commendation for exposing the crimes despite personal risk that could have cost him everything. His first official act was arresting Dietrich's surviving gunmen on charges ranging from arson to attempted murder. His second was organizing systematic searches that would locate other victims of the trafficking network. Those searches proved more successful than anyone had dared hope. Ayanna was found in a hidden cabin 20 miles north of Willow Springs, guarded by 2 men who surrendered without resistance when faced with federal authority backed by cavalry carbines. She was physically unharmed, but bore psychological scars that would take months or years to heal completely. But Ayanna had not been a passive victim during her weeks of captivity. The intelligent girl had managed to steal a small notebook from her captors, a detailed record of their operations that revealed the true scope of Dietrich's empire in handwriting that would hang men or set them free. The notebook contained names, locations, financial records, and operational details that would help federal authorities dismantle the entire network from top to bottom. The trafficking operation was more systematically organized than anyone imagined. Magnus reported as they reviewed evidence in chambers that smelled of sawdust and legal precedent. Dietrich wasn't just buying girls from local tribes, he had established supply lines across 3 territories, coordinating with similar operations to meet demand throughout the frontier. Judge Crawford made careful notes in his judicial record with handwriting that would influence territorial law for decades to come. The silver-haired judge had presided over many difficult cases during his years on the frontier bench. But the scope and systematic nature of Dietrich's corruption had shocked even his experienced sensibilities. These ledger entries show payments to officials at every level of territorial government. Crawford observed turning pages covered with Dr. Marcel's careful transcription. This wasn't simple bribery, but comprehensive subversion of legal authority designed to create a shadow government answerable only to Dietrich's interests. The formal hearings began with witnesses called in careful order, designed to establish chronology while building unshakable legal foundation. Dr. Marcel testified first about Pierre René's original water claim and the suspicious circumstances surrounding land clerk Thomas Ackerman's death, providing medical expertise that supported conclusions about systematic murder to cover financial fraud. But the most dramatic testimony came when Sheriff Magnus took the witness stand. Rising with visible effort, his weathered hands gripping the chairback, Magnus's voice carried across the packed courtroom like thunder rolling across the plains. Your Honor, before I describe what I witnessed, I need to confess something that's been eating at my soul for 3 years. Judge Crawford leaned forward with interest. Proceed, Sheriff. My brother Thomas filed a competing water claim upstream from Dietrich's operation in 1875. Magnus began each word, carrying weight of accumulated guilt. Thomas was honest, followed every regulation paid, every fee did everything according to law. But his claim would have limited Dietrich's expansion plans. The courtroom fell silent as Magnus continued with visible effort. Thomas died in what looked like a mining accident tunnel collapse that trapped him underground. Dietrich expressed sympathy, even paid for a proper funeral with flowers and everything. Said it was terrible tragedy act of God. His voice broke slightly before strengthening with resolve. 6 months later, Dietrich came to my office with photographs he claimed to have found among his foreman's possessions after the man died of fever. Pictures of Thomas's body before the cave-in, showing he'd been shot in the back before explosives brought down the tunnel. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as the implications became clear. Crawford's gavel restored order before he spoke. You're testifying that Conrad Dietrich murdered your brother and then used photographic evidence of that murder to control your official actions. Yes, Your Honor. He said those photographs would surface if I didn't cooperate with his business interests. Said it would look like I'd killed Thomas myself for insurance money, since I was the beneficiary of his policy. Magnus straightened his shoulders with visible effort. I've carried that shame for 3 years, letting innocent people suffer, because I was too much of a coward to face the truth and accept whatever punishment I deserved. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom that took several minutes of gavel pounding to subdue. Dietrich's corruption went far beyond simple bribery to calculated murder and systematic blackmail, creating webs of fear and complicity that had paralyzed law enforcement throughout the region. When Elise took the witness stand, her voice carried clear and steady across the hushed courtroom. As she recounted her kidnapping and the conditions of her imprisonment that revealed the trafficking network's casual cruelty toward human dignity. She presented her father's documents with quiet composure that honored both his memory and the legal principles he had trusted to protect his family's future. My father taught me to read survey maps and understand legal documents from the time I was old enough to hold a pencil, she testified. He believed knowledge was the only thing that could never be stolen from a person, the only inheritance that couldn't be taken by force or fraud. I never imagined I would need that knowledge to survive in a world where law had been replaced by gold and violence. Her testimony revealed not just personal courage, but Pierre René's foresighted preparation for the challenges his daughter might face in a frontier society that offered women few protections. The mine owner hadn't simply coveted her water rights, he had studied territorial law with lawyers' precision, identified vulnerabilities in the system, and exploited them with surgical efficiency that spoke of long-term planning. Tokala's testimony focused on the military aspects of their conflict, his warrior's perspective providing crucial details about Dietrich's private army and their professional tactics that helped federal investigators understand how the criminal network had operated with such deadly efficiency across vast territorial distances. They moved like soldiers, not cowboys or miners pressed into temporary service. He testified in English, grown fluent through constant use. Coordinated attacks, professional weapons handling discipline under fire, this was organized military force answerable to single command authority. The most emotionally powerful moment came when Ayanna testified about her ordeal, speaking in halting English, supplemented by Lakota phrases that Tokala translated for the court's benefit. The young woman's voice was barely audible at first, as she described being torn from her family during what should have been peaceful gathering. But as she continued, her words gained strength and clarity that commanded absolute attention from everyone present. They treated us like animals to be bought and sold, she said, dark eyes flashing with anger that had replaced terror through weeks of survival. But they made mistakes because they thought we were too stupid to understand their plans or remember their words. She produced the notebook she had stolen, its pages covered with incriminating details, written in careful script that belied her youth. I listened to everything, memorized names and numbers, then wrote it all down when I found paper and ink. They thought Indian girls couldn't read or write, so they talked freely about their business in front of us. Her intelligence and courage in gathering evidence while maintaining the pretense of ignorant captivity had provided crucial pieces needed to dismantle Dietrich's empire completely. The notebook contained operational details, financial arrangements, and future plans that would keep federal investigators busy for months, tracking down every thread of the conspiracy. Judge Crawford's final ruling came after 3 days of testimony that laid bare the full scope of territorial corruption with surgical precision. Standing before the packed courtroom with authority that brooked no argument, his voice carried the weight of federal law as he delivered judgment that would echo through territorial history. The evidence presented to this court reveals crimes that transcend simple greed or local corruption, he declared. What Conrad Dietrich constructed was nothing less than systematic assault on the rule of law itself, designed to replace legitimate government with shadow authority, answerable only to private interests, backed by violence and intimidation. He paused to let those words sink in before continuing. While Dietrich himself has paid the ultimate price for his crimes, his surviving associates will face the full weight of territorial and federal justice. More importantly, this court hereby establishes new procedures for investigating similar corruption and protecting vulnerable citizens from exploitation, regardless of their race, gender, or social position. The legal proceedings concluded with formal restoration of Elise's water rights establishment of compensation funds for trafficking victims and creation of legal precedents that would protect property owners throughout the territory for generations to come. But beyond formal justice, the case had demonstrated that cooperation between different peoples was not only possible, but essential for survival in a changing world. As the courthouse emptied and officials prepared to return to distant posts throughout the territory, Tokala found himself facing the decision he had avoided throughout the weeks of legal proceedings that had consumed so much of their lives. The crisis that had brought him and Elise together was finally over, but their relationship remained undefined, neither fully resolved nor completely abandoned despite everything they had shared. She approached him as he prepared to rejoin his family at their camp among the pines, her blonde hair catching afternoon sunlight despite its need for proper care and attention. The soot-stained dress had been replaced by well-tailored blue outfit that spoke of improving circumstances, making her appear more like the confident frontier woman she had become, rather than the helpless victim she had never truly been. So, her voice carried quiet uncertainty that surprised him. What happens now? It was a question with no simple answer that could satisfy either heart or mind completely. Tokala's duty to his people would always come first within a world where survival required constant vigilance against encroaching settlement that threatened to swallow everything his ancestors had built. But weeks fighting beside Elise had created bonds that transcended cultural boundaries through shared trials that tested both courage and character. "I must return to my people," he said finally, words carrying weight of obligation that honor demanded. "There is much work to be done if we are to survive the changes coming to this land." Elise nodded with understanding that honored both his choice and her own disappointment, emotions flickering briefly across her features before being replaced by acceptance born of frontier pragmatism. "And I will use these water rights to build something better here. Fair distribution for all the valley's residents, not just the wealthy and powerful." They stood in silence that stretched toward eternity, each recognizing this might be their final conversation, despite attraction that had grown between them during their shared ordeal. Some barriers seemed too high to overcome, regardless of mutual respect, earned through trial by fire. But as Tokala mounted his pony and prepared to ride toward obligations waiting among the pines, Elise made a decision that surprised them both with its practical boldness. "Wait." Her voice carried clearly across the courthouse yard where autumn leaves scattered like dreams on the wind. "What if there was a way to honor both our duties while acknowledging what has grown between us?" Winter arrived early in Dakota territory that year, blanketing the valley in pristine snow that transformed Dietrich's scarred landscape into something approaching natural beauty, restored by nature's patient healing. By Christmas 1878, Elise had made good on her promise to distribute Willow Creek's water fairly among all residents, regardless of race or social position. The Henderson family was among the first to benefit from the new arrangements. Sarah Henderson wept with relief as clear water flowed through irrigation channels to their withered fields, while her husband Jacob spoke quietly of replanting come spring. Their youngest boy no longer tugged at his mother's skirt, asking for water that didn't exist. "I thought we'd lost everything," Jacob confided to Elise during one of her visits to survey the distribution system's effectiveness. "Dietrich's dam had us ready to pack up and head back east, tails between our legs." "The water belongs to everyone," Elise replied simply. "My father understood that. Said hoarding nature's gifts was like trying to own the wind or the rain." Working with an honest territorial engineer whose integrity had survived Dietrich's corruption, she had designed an innovative irrigation system serving both small farms around prairie rows and seasonal camps used by Tokala's people during hunting migrations. It was practical cooperation that benefited everyone, while avoiding the political complications of formal treaties that might anger territorial authorities. The water rights had also made her wealthy by frontier standards, though she measured success in terms of lives improved rather than gold accumulated in bank accounts. Several mining companies had offered substantial sums for the privilege of using Willow Creek's flow, and she had negotiated carefully to ensure future operations would maintain proper environmental safeguards and fair labor practices that honored both white law and Indian wisdom. Tokala had indeed returned to his people initially, but not in the way anyone had expected. Elise's proposal at the courthouse had been revolutionary. In its simplicity, a formal business partnership that would allow them to work together while respecting cultural boundaries that made traditional marriage politically impossible given frontier social realities. Under their carefully negotiated agreement, Tokala served as her chief advisor on matters involving tribal relations and frontier security, while she used her legal ownership of water rights to ensure Lakota hunting camps had reliable access to clean water during seasonal migrations. It was an arrangement that satisfied practical needs while allowing their personal relationship to develop naturally without forcing impossible choices. The partnership had proven beneficial beyond either's expectations. Elise's knowledge of French and English, combined with her legal status as property owner, gave her access to territorial officials and business networks that remained closed to most Indians, regardless of individual merit. Tokala's understanding of tribal politics and his reputation as Kit Fox warrior provided security and credibility that no amount of money could purchase in a territory where violence remained commonplace. Their personal relationship had evolved slowly, but with depth that surprised them both. The desperate attraction born of shared danger had matured into genuine respect and affection, built through countless hours working toward common goals that transcended racial boundaries through demonstrated commitment to justice and mutual survival. When they finally acknowledged their feelings openly on New Year's Eve, it was with confidence of people who had tested each other under the most difficult circumstances possible, and found the partnership both worthwhile and sustainable. Their love had grown from necessity into conscious choice, from gratitude into genuine affection that honored both hearts and minds. The ceremony took place on Valentine's Day, 1879, conducted simultaneously according to both Lakota and Christian traditions in recognition of their dual heritage that neither would abandon. Around the sacred fire, Winona blessed their union with sweetgrass and traditional songs that called upon ancestral spirits for protection and guidance through the challenges ahead. Wakantanka smiles on unions that strengthen the people. She intoned her weathered hands, weaving blessing smoke around the couple. May your children walk in two worlds with pride in both. Dr. Marcel, now serving as Prairie Rose's unofficial minister, as well as physician, performed the legal ceremony required by territorial law. His words were carefully chosen to honor both traditions represented in this unprecedented union. In the eyes of law and in the sight of God, you are joined not just as husband and wife, but as bridge between peoples who share this land, he declared. May your partnership bring healing where there has been conflict, understanding where there has been suspicion. Even young Shatan, initially hostile to their relationship, had come to grudging acceptance of the arrangement. Perhaps, he admitted to Winona after the ceremony, there are some Wasiku worth knowing after all. The social complications they had feared proved less severe than expected, though not entirely absent from daily experience. Frontier communities were surprisingly practical about survival arrangements when faced with harsh realities that made cooperation more valuable than prejudice. A woman controlling crucial water rights and a warrior providing effective security were both valuable assets whose combined influence carried more weight than individual settlers' disapproval. Not everyone approved, of course. Certain white families refused association with a woman married to an Indian, while some tribal members questioned whether Tokala's loyalty to traditional ways had been corrupted by white woman's influence. But the majority of residents in both communities gradually recognized practical benefits and accepted the unusual arrangement as another frontier adaptation necessary for mutual survival. Now, on an April morning, warm with spring's promise, Elise stood at their cabin window overlooking Willow Creek and watched her husband teaching neighboring children to track animals in mud left by melting snow. The sight filled her with contentment she had never expected to find in a world that often seemed designed to crush such happiness. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, where the unmistakable signs of pregnancy were beginning to show. Despite loose-fitting dresses chosen to conceal her condition until they were ready for public announcement. They had not planned for a child so soon after their marriage. but the prospect filled both with joy rather than concern about additional complications in lives already complicated by cultural differences. Their partnership was strong enough to support a growing family, and their combined resources would give their children advantages available to few frontier offspring. More importantly, their child would grow up knowing that love could transcend racial barriers, and that cooperation between different peoples was not only possible, but beneficial for everyone involved. A familiar knock at the door interrupted her contemplation of the future. Magnus Klaus stood on the porch, with badge glinting in spring sunlight, an expression that mixed official business with personal friendship that had grown from their shared trials. "A morning, Elise." He accepted coffee gratefully while stamping mud from his boots. "Tokala around got news from the territorial capital he'll want to hear. Teaching the Henderson and Morrison children to read animal signs." She replied, pointing toward figures visible among the cottonwoods, where laughter mixed with serious instruction. "What's the word from Deadwood this time?" Magnus settled into a chair by the fire-weathered face, serious but carrying hope that had been absent during their darkest days fighting Dietrich's corruption. Governor Pennington's establishing new policy for water rights disputes throughout Dakota Territory based directly on what happened here last year. They're calling it the Willow Creek Precedent. Meaning what exactly? Means other people facing your situation will have legal protections that didn't exist before. Magnus explained with satisfaction that spoke of justice delayed but not permanently denied. Can't just kidnap someone and force them to sign over property anymore without facing immediate federal intervention. Has to go through proper courts with proper legal representation, and there are new penalties for officials who take bribes to falsify documents. It was vindication for the suffering they had endured, though Elise wondered whether such policies would be consistently enforced in remote areas where federal authority remained weak, and local corruption could flourish unchecked by distant oversight. Still, it represented genuine progress, incremental change that might prevent others from experiencing what she had survived during those weeks that had transformed her from city seamstress to frontier woman. Tokala entered with children in tow, their faces red from cold, but bright with excitement from outdoor lessons in traditional skills that white schools never taught and never would. He had adapted to domestic life more easily than anyone expected, though he still maintained his warrior's physical conditioning, and periodically disappeared for days at a time to fulfill obligations to the Kit Fox Society that had shaped his identity since childhood. Sheriff. He hung his coat on a wooden peg by the door. More complications from territorial politics. Good news for once. Magnus replied, explaining about policy changes that honored their struggle with lasting legal reform. Your testimony before Judge Crawford helped convince officials that stronger protections were needed for all property owners, regardless of their race or social position. They discussed implications while children played near the fireplace, their innocent laughter providing pleasant counterpoint to serious conversation about legal reform and territorial politics that would affect generations yet unborn. It struck Elise that this was what civilization should truly represent. Not the ruthless exploitation embodied by men like Conrad Dietrich, but careful balance of different peoples and interests working toward mutual benefit through cooperation rather than domination. The final surprise came when Dr. Marcel arrived in late April, with news that would have seemed impossible during the dark days of their conflict with Dietrich's criminal empire. A territorial delegation had traveled from the capital with an unprecedented offer that recognized their unique partnership and its success in resolving conflicts that had plagued other parts of Dakota Territory. The meeting took place in Marcel's rebuilt clinic afternoon sunlight, streaming through new windows as the delegation's leader, distinguished Harrison Webb, recently arrived from Washington, spread official documents across the examination table with ceremonial precision. Governor Pennington has been following your case with great interest. Webb began his Eastern accent, marking him as recently transplanted from civilized society. Your water-sharing agreements have prevented conflicts that erupted into violence elsewhere in the territory, saving both lives and federal resources. The governor wants to formalize this success. He paused to ensure their attention before continuing. We're prepared to offer Mr. Tokala official appointment as territorial liaison between tribal governments and civil authorities, with Mrs. Collette serving as his legal advisor and interpreter for negotiations requiring understanding of both white law and Indian customs. Tokala and Elise exchanged glances that communicated wordlessly in the way couples develop over time, when words become unnecessary for basic understanding. The offer was simultaneously tempting and daunting, a chance to use their hard-won experience helping others while serving a cause larger than immediate personal interests. The position would require considerable travel. Webb continued noting their serious expressions as they contemplated implications. Sometimes dangerous assignments in areas where tensions run high between different groups competing for land and resources. But it would also provide opportunity to prevent conflicts before they escalate into the kind of violence we witnessed here. The appointment would make them federal employees with regular salaries, legal protections against local harassment and authority to investigate disputes involving both white settlers and Indian tribes throughout the vast expanse of Dakota territory. Our headquarters would remain here. Elise asked, one hand unconsciously moving to her belly, where new life was beginning its journey. Your base of operations would stay in this valley. Webb confirmed. But you'd travel extensively as situations required federal attention. The governor believes your example of successful cooperation could be replicated elsewhere if properly supported by territorial authority. Dr. Marcel leaned forward with professional interest in the legal implications. What kind of backing would they have in the field? Full territorial authority to investigate land disputes, mediate conflicts between competing interests, and recommend prosecutions when criminal activity is discovered. Webb replied. They would report directly to the governor's office and have access to federal marshals when enforcement becomes necessary for public safety. It was more power and responsibility than either had imagined possible when their worlds first collided in that smoke-filled alley behind the Silver Spur. Their partnership, born from desperate circumstances and mistaken identity, was being formally recognized as a model for territorial administration in an era of unprecedented change. We'll need time to discuss all implications, Elise said diplomatically, though privately, she was already leaning toward acceptance despite challenges such work would inevitably bring to their growing family. That evening, as they discussed the momentous decision while watching sunset paint Willow Creek in shades of gold and crimson, Tokala surprised her with his perspective on the territorial government's offer that could reshape their future in ways they were only beginning to understand. My grandfather once told me that a warrior's greatest victory is not defeating enemies in battle, but making it unnecessary for his children to fight the same battles their parents faced, he said, dark eyes reflecting firelight from their cabin's hearth. Perhaps this appointment is how we achieve that victory for the next generation. Elise nodded slowly, understanding the profound wisdom contained in those simple words. Our child will grow up in a world where cooperation between peoples is normal rather than extraordinary. That legacy is worth any sacrifice we might be called upon to make. They accepted the position the following week, beginning a new chapter in their partnership that would take them far from the quiet valley, where their love had grown from necessity into conscious choice. But they would carry with them the lessons learned during those desperate months when justice had seemed impossible and survival uncertain, using that hard-won knowledge to help others navigate the complex challenges of frontier life. Standing together on their cabin's porch as spring turned toward summer, Tokala's protective arm around Elise's waist while her hand rested over their growing child, they faced the future with confidence, born from surviving the worst that frontier life could offer to those who dared to love across the boundaries that divided their world. Their story would be told for generations not as romantic fantasy, but as proof that understanding between different peoples was not only possible, but essential for survival in a changing world where the old ways were dying and new ones struggled to be born. The mistake that had brought them together at the Silver Spur Saloon had become the foundation for a life neither could have imagined when gunfire first shattered that August night, proving that Providence sometimes worked through human error to achieve purposes that transcended individual understanding. Years later, when historians wrote about Dakota Territory's transformation from lawless frontier to organized state, they would note many individuals who helped shape that evolution through courage, wisdom, and dedication to principles larger than personal advantage. Among them would be a Lakota warrior named Tokala and a French immigrant named Elise Colette, whose unlikely partnership had demonstrated that cooperation could triumph over conflict when people of goodwill chose understanding over prejudice, justice over gold, and love over the fear that kept their peoples apart. But that recognition would come from future generations blessed with the clarity that only historical perspective could provide. For now it was enough that they had found each other in the darkness of Conrad Dietrich's greed and created something beautiful from the ashes of his corrupt empire. Their children would grow up knowing that love could transcend any barrier and that justice was always worth fighting for, no matter the personal cost in blood, tears, or sacrifice. As evening stars appeared over Willow Creek and their unborn child stirred beneath Elise's heart like a promise of tomorrow, they knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most beautiful destinations could only be reached by taking what appeared to be the wrong path. The mistake that had saved 2 lives and destroyed an empire of corruption had become their greatest blessing, proof that even in a world where might too often made right, love and justice could still triumph when good people chose to stand together against the darkness.